Welcome to St. Mark as we continue a series we've entitled Sleeping Beauty, the Church on Earth. Jesus used the analogy, and the scriptures do as well, is that what happens is Jesus is the bridegroom, and the church is his bride for whom he died. And we understand that love Jesus has for us in what he instituted that we call marriage. And so I'm glad you're here as we're in the midst of a three-part series talking about the third letter in the word wife, and I'll expand on that in a minute. So far in this series, we've talked about the word church a lot. We've learned from the Bible that the church is not a what, it is a who. There's a great danger in talking about the church as a what, because then you start talking about something that's apart from people, separated from people, that they can travel to, go to, attend, and support, as well as join. Then what you think you need to do is just build greater churches because you have been convinced that the primary way and strategy God is going to impact this world is through great churches. That naturally leads, that belief that you think the church is an organization connected to a building, that naturally and inevitably leads to a discussion about how to do church better. But when you think about church biblically, you understand the word church is a Greek word that means the called out ones. People called out of the darkness of unbelief into the light of Jesus Christ. A gathering, a movement that never ends until he comes again. If you understand church from the who mode, then you talk about what does it mean to be the people of God. You understand the task of the church on earth, the local church, is to build up more faithful Christians because you realize God calls people like you and me to go ahead and reflect his redemptive love to the world in us and through us. When we are reminded of that truth, then we as a church, the called out ones, the gathering, we then focus on the mission, and our mission is to be the church in a world that desperately needs the church. For St. Mark to be the kind of church Jesus wants his church to be, we need to keep our focus on his goals and his plans, not our own. We need to travel down his path and his course. Row to his cadence and have his wind in our sails. But what exactly does that look like? Well, one of the ways you, as a church, can understand if you're still focusing on Jesus' mission is to just examine, earthly relationships, both inside this group and outside of it. When you examine how you treat other people, it tells you something about how you really think about God and what kind of church we really are. This weekend, what we're going to do, that brings us to the third letter in the acronym WIFE. Last weekend, Ben Workentine did a great job of starting off the series by talking about the first two letters, the W and the I, talking about worship and instruction. A very vertical relationship with God where God brings us into his family as brothers and sisters in Christ, sons and daughters, through his means, his grace, his power. Today we're looking at the third letter in the acronym WIFE, the F, which stands for fellowship. We're going to look at a horizontal look, a more look at ourselves as parts of this church. As we do so, we're going to take probably a very practical look at how we can be that kind of church. So today, let's go ahead and join the Christians in the early Christian church in Acts 2 and see how they had this care and fellowship for one another. Now, I will tell you, when we look at those people in Acts chapter 2, they would be rather puzzled at our custom now in the 21st century of going ahead and sitting indiscriminately in a building like this. And then some of us, for one reason or another, when the last song is played or the last prayer is being prayed, kind of sneak out and get on our way. Or as soon as the service is over, we dart through all the people in the atrium and just head out. They never did that. When they gathered in a place like this, they gathered not just to worship and to learn, but they gathered to do life together, to get to know, to catch up, to maybe go out to eat together. They were a very close, knit group. They were fellowship continually. Now that word fellowship connotes the idea of a very close-knit group. The word comes from a root word that means common or communal. The early Christian church was a group of people who were common and sharing people. Acts chapter 2, verse 44 says this: all the believers were together and had everything in common. One author I read breaks down all Christians and Christian churches really into two groups of people. I think this is pretty smart. Marbles and grapes. Marbles are single units that don't affect each other except in collision. Grapes, on the other hand, mingle juices. Each one is a part of the fragrance of the group. The early Christians didn't bounce off of one another like loose marbles, ricocheting in all directions. Rather, they more represented a cluster of ripe grapes that were often squeezed in persecution, thus bleeding and mingling all over one another. What fellowship is a genuine concern and care for people in the family of faith. There are a lot of people today, maybe you're here today because you're looking for that kind of closeness in the church. Sermons and songs can certainly uplift, but that's only in part, and that's only a part of the whole church encounter. You see, we need to do life with people. We need to be in ministry and minister with people. If you're just kind of cruising in and then cruising out on a Sunday morning like this without it getting any fresh grape juice stains on yourself, then you really haven't tasted the sweet wine of fellowship. When the Bible talks about this kind of fellowship, this care and concern for brothers and sisters in the faith, it gives you a number of ways you can go ahead and exhibit that in your life. Practice it. Let's just talk about two today. First one is this. You can express this kind of care, concern, this fellowship by tangibly giving to others who are in genuine need. In Acts chapter 2, verse 45, it says, they sold property and possessions to give to everyone who had need. What an example of sacrificial giving. Believers were selling their property and their possessions and giving the proceeds to people, hurting people who were relying on fellow brothers and sisters in Christ for their survival. Historians both inside and outside the church tell us that the Christians in the first century had this incredible characteristic of unselfishness. Add to all of these the families who were ostracized and probably persecuted for their newfound faith, and you see this need just growing insurmountably in the early Christian church at lightning speed. We see that same kind of need for people inside the church 21 centuries later, and we see it really increase in surmountable speed as well. Let's face it, you and I live in a 24/7 news cycle where we can know everything about everyone, everywhere on the globe, everywhere. Think about it. Every natural disaster, every Amber Alert, every war or conflict, every addiction story, every foreclosure, every divorce statistic. I don't know how you deal with that. No doubt some people, maybe some of you listening, what you do is you say, it's just overwhelming. I'm just going to shut it off. I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to shut it out of my life. Others of you, you're very compassionate people. And you can't even stand to watch the news or listen to the news or even read the headlines. It just hurts you. So you just try to shut it out. In addition, you got stuff going on in your own life. You got a relative going through a divorce. Or you stop to fill up for gas at the local gas station after the worship service and you know there's a benefit for a little girl who has cancer. Or you got a friend at work who pulled you aside in the lunchroom and said, I'm going through a difficulty in my marriage and I was wondering if you could give me some advice. And you get to a point where you just want to throw up your hands and say, I can't do this. I don't want to be about it. I just want to shut it off. It's way too much. It's overwhelming. I'm just going to shut it out. and you don't want to do anything. And you know that the government throws billions and billions of dollars at stuff like this, and it hasn't made a dent in people's sufferings. And so a lot of people just say, I'm not doing anything. I'm going to ignore it. I'm just going to keep myself in my lane. I'm not going to help people when I have opportunity and the means. None of that. But we can't do that. We're Jesus followers. We're called to a different standard and life. And yet, let's be honest, we know we can't solve this. And what makes it so overwhelming today in the 21st century, and we see the needs of fellow Christians that we call family members, partners here at St. Mark, what problem is we have this instant access. You know, it's amazing. It used to be, in the good old days, before Google, that the only natural disaster you knew about was the one that occurred in your town when the local river flooded. The only person you knew who had health issues was the older lady that lived next to you. The only poor family you knew was the one down the street. The only person you knew getting a divorce was your cousin. And the only person you knew that had a family that had issues was your best friend's family. You didn't know everything about everyone and everywhere. You didn't. But now we have access to everything with that rectangle in our pocket that gives us access to the world all the time. And it just gets more and more and more need is piled upon us. And so a lot of times we just want to throw up our hands and say, I just want it all shut out. And you can't do that because we don't live in that kind of culture anymore and that world. And as Christians, we shouldn't do that. And yet we know we can't solve this ourselves. The Apostle Paul, in Galatians chapter 5, addresses this in verse 2 when he says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. Here's what I know, understanding that I can't help everyone who's in genuine need, but knowing that I'm called to carry other people's burdens when I have the opportunity and the means. One thing I learned from a book I read about 2 decades ago is this phrase: try to do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Think about that one person or that small group that you can actually make an impact in and with today. Try to do for one that you wish you could do for everyone. My prayer for you this fall is that in the next 4 months, God nudges you. You finally see the single mom in the congregation. You finally notice the struggling family. You see that group of high school kids that maybe could use some help. Or you see that struggling guy at work. And at that point, I hope God nudges you. And he says, there's your one. Now do for that one that you wish you could do for everyone. And don't come up with the excuse that says, well, because I can't do it for everyone, I'm going to do it for nobody. Don't be that person. I've learned through the years there's a number of ways and a number of key characteristics as you try to have this fellowship that the early Christian church had. And let me just give you 3 characteristics to take home. First of all, as you're trying to do for one what you can't do for everyone, go ahead and go deep, not wide. Let's say you have a real passion for high school ministry, and we've got a big one here and we can use a lot of help. Maybe you got a passion for high school ministry because when you were in high school, it didn't go well for you. So you have a passion for that ministry. Then go deep. Be involved. You see, so often, a lot of you too as well at St. Mark, you got passion, but you only go wide. Do you know what you do? You say, oh, I'll give $10 to support teen ministry. I'll go ahead and pray for youth ministry once. No, I'm telling you, you got to go deep. Get involved in their lives. That's where life change occurs. Next thing you need to do is you need to go long, not short. This is not a one and done commitment. Maybe it means you choose a group of high school students and you walk with them through their 4-year high school experience. Being there to be an ear there, a guide, maybe someone they can vent to, wisdom when they need it. Maybe it means you care for that single mom until she's back on her feet. Go long. Finally, I'd like you to go with time, not just with money. Now, as Americans, this is really hard for us because we are all rich in comparison to most of the people around the globe. I'm looking at rich people right now. You're looking at a rich person, comparatively. Let's face it, many of us, we got a house for our car called a garage that is larger than many of the homes people live in around the globe. Oh, we are a very rich people and we're a generous people. We like to give, but we do not like to give our time, do we? We'll give you money, then go away. But we don't want to give our time because we all know deep down our time is more valuable than our money. So give your time along with your money. When God goes ahead, when God nudges you about that single mom or that struggling family, or that guy at work, or that group of high school students, make sure you go deep, you go long, and you go with time. Tangibly, sharing with others in need is one way to exhibit that kind of fellowship we see in Acts chapter 2, and that's what Jesus wants his bride to be today. Another way that you can really act out or live that kind of fellowship is this: by sharing in something with someone else. The Bible describes it this way: weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Sometimes the best thing you can give people is yourself. I mean, what price tag can you put on the tears you shed for someone else's loss? Or the time you give to a friend who's going through a difficult time and she just needs to vent? Or the applause you give to one of your coworkers who finally gets a well-deserved promotion? Sometimes the best thing you can give is your presence, yourself. I have a lot of people through the years ask me, "Hey, John, what do I say? What do I do when my friend is fill in the blank?" Sometimes the best thing you can do is give yourself. I mean, all of you can think back to a time in your life. Maybe it was a great time of celebration, or maybe it was an unplanned, horrible visit to the emergency room. I'm willing to bet that you really can't tell me what people said to you then. But everyone listening to me can remember who was there for them then. Fellowship, that care and concern, is about sharing in something with someone else, and sometimes the best thing you can give them is being there for them. Fellowship. It's when Jesus followers have a spirit of sharing, full hearts and hands with empty ones. And when we have that kind of fellowship in our congregation, then we really mirror what Jesus, the bridegroom of the church, has already done for us. Think about it. Talk about sharing tangibly with people in need. He comes down from heaven and gives us his body and blood. He sheds it on a cross to make payment for all of our sins, so the past doesn't need to be your present or your future. That's how powerful forgiveness is. And then he says, by the way, I'm going to give you a special meal called the Lord's Supper or Holy Communion. And in it, until I come again, a second and final time, it's the only way I physically touch you, because my body and blood is really there in a real way, yet mysterious way. And then what does he do? He also came here and shared in something with us. He shared in this sinful world with us, where he's tempted in every way we are, but he doesn't sin, because he's our perfect substitute. And then he shares in death, because all of us are going to face death. Only he conquers it for us, so we don't have to fear it. That's care and concern on a divine level. When we as the church actually mirror that kind of fellowship, what happens is the world then takes notice. And when that happens, then the E in the acronym WIFE happens. But that's for next weekend.